Why was the room so quiet, when only moments ago it had been full of laughter? Because one man made a mistake, and one woman refused to flinch. He pointed at her chest, a young officer, full of bravado and the kind of arrogance that only grows in people who have never been tested. His voice carried like a slap across polished floors. "Ma'am, you think that little limp gets you out of inspection." The chuckles that followed weren't cruel at first, not really. They were the kind of careless laughter soldiers spill out when they don't know what else to do. But then the silence came. A sudden, unnatural stillness that wrapped itself around every throat in that briefing room. She didn't laugh. She didn't explain. She stood there steady, her hands clasped behind her back, her boots locked as if rooted into the very floor. The insult rolled over her like dust over stone. But she moved. Slowly, deliberately, one step forward. The sound of her boot echoed, sharp and clear. The officer's smirk wavered, but he didn't step back. Not yet. With careful hands, she began to unbutton her regulation shirt. No one spoke. The air tightened, held between curiosity and unease. She wasn't flaunting. She wasn't rebelling. She was simply showing. And then the fabric fell open. The admiral, a man who had spent decades in service, stopped breathing. The scars weren't faint lines. They weren't fading reminders. They were brutal cross-hatched marks running across her ribs like lightning had struck and never left. Wounds carved deep into flesh, stories etched without permission. Scars no one walks away from. Scars that didn't just tell a past, they screamed it. The young officer's face drained. He stepped back, his bravado cracked in half. Her name was Lieutenant Rains, 31 years old, combat medic, Bronze Star, 3 deployments, and a survivor of something no file could ever capture. The limp that officer mocked came from shrapnel near her spine. A bullet that should have taken her life had instead buried itself in bone, leaving her body altered but her spirit unbroken. Retirement was offered, papers stamped and ready. She refused. She wasn't finished. So she retrained. She stayed. She worked from the ground up, dusty tents, blood-stained uniforms, hands pressed to wounds that sometimes closed, sometimes didn't. No parades, no speeches, just quiet work. Like the night she sat in the back of a supply truck with a 19-year-old private. His chest had been torn open and he was too far gone for morphine to matter. He asked her if it would hurt. She didn't answer. She just hummed an old lullaby her grandmother once sang when the world outside was too loud. For 6 hours she stayed with him until he slipped away. She never knew his name until later, but she never forgot his face. Every year since, she visited his grave. Alone. No ceremony. Just memory. When she came home after her last deployment, no one cheered. No banners. Just a clipboard shoved across a desk, a line for her to sign. The medals were handed over in silence like loose change. She never asked for recognition, but she had earned more than silence. That morning she arrived at Naval Base Grant, reassignment orders, a simple file review, except a clerical error had flagged her as unfit. The admiral called her in personally, maybe to dismiss her, maybe to measure her worth with his own eyes. She didn't know. She didn't ask. But when that young officer mocked her, when his words cracked like a whip across the air, the room crossed a line it couldn't uncross. And she didn't say a word. Because sometimes words don't matter. Sometimes silence speaks louder than anything else. The admiral stepped closer. His eyes never left her ribs, the jagged scars angled and deep, unmistakably combat's signature. He didn't see weakness. He didn't see brokenness. He saw truth. He saw what too many forget, that silence often hides more courage than speeches ever hold. Had once carried a dying corporal across a valley while bleeding out herself. She never told anyone. She never needed to. But scars never lie. They remember when people choose to forget. A whisper rose from the back of the room. No one claimed it, but the admiral raised his hand. Silence deepened again, like a blade cutting air. "She has nothing to prove to any of us," he said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through arrogance like steel. The young officer dropped his eyes, shame crawling up his neck. Buttoned her shirt. Her fingers didn't tremble. She stood straight, steady, the limp in her step suddenly irrelevant. "You may stand down, Lieutenant Raines," the admiral said. His tone softened. "But we owe you more than orders." She gave a nod, not a salute, just a nod. The kind of gesture that said, "I've seen worse. I walked through it, and I'm still here." When she turned to leave, the door opened. A line of junior medics stood outside. They didn't say a word, but each of them touched their chest as she passed. A silent salute, not regulation, but reverence. Inside the room, the admiral didn't move. His eyes shifted to the photograph on his desk. A battlefield nurse from 20 years ago. She had the same eyes carried, silent, unbroken. Sometimes the loudest respect is silence. That day, a policy changed across the base. Combat medical veterans would receive full honors during reassignment reviews. His name was never written into the order, but everyone knew why it changed. Later, she sat outside on a bench by the flagpole. The sun was sinking, the sky bleeding colors across the horizon. She brushed her hand across her ribs, not in shame, in memory, in respect for the brothers and sisters who never came home. And still she said nothing. Because the truth doesn't always need to be shouted. Sometimes it only needs to be seen. Why did she keep seeing the boy's face in her dreams? The 19-year-old private, the one who slipped away in the back of a supply truck. It had been years, but some nights the air still smelled of diesel and dust. The same lullaby trembled in her throat when she woke, breathless, heart pounding against the scars across her ribs. She never told anyone about that night, not in full. Because some things you carry alone, not out of pride, but because you don't want to burden the living with the weight of the dead. That was the secret she never shared, not with her commanding officers, not with the admiral, not even with the chaplain who once asked her why she looked so tired during morning muster. She lied. She said she had migraines. He nodded, offered a prayer, and walked away. Migraines were easier to explain than ghosts. The bench outside Naval Base Grant was cool beneath her hands. The flag above her head clattered softly in the evening wind. She sat still, but inside her, the noise never stopped. A shadow moved across the pavement. Boots, polished, quick. A junior medic, barely 20, stopped in front of her. "Lieutenant Raines, ma'am, permission to speak." She looked up, nodded once. The young medic hesitated. His hand twitched near his chest like he wanted to salute but thought better of it. "What you did in there, I just want to say it mattered." Didn't answer. She didn't need to. She watched him shift awkwardly, then retreat with the same quick steps. But the words lingered. It mattered. That night she went back to the small on-base quarters assigned to her. 4 walls, a bed too stiff to comfort, a desk with a single lamp. The room felt like a holding cell, not a home. She sat at the desk, opened a plain notebook, and began to write. Not letters, not reports, just fragments. Memories she didn't want to forget but didn't dare speak aloud. The firefight in Kandahar. The dust storm in Helmand. The convoy ambush that left 3 dead before dawn. Each memory scratched onto paper in blunt lines. No embellishment, no self-pity. Just the facts her heart remembered even when her mind wanted to erase them. But there was one page she couldn't bring herself to write, the one memory that made her hands shake whenever she tried. The mission, the one where she had been ordered to retreat but stayed. She could still see it, the explosion that tore the night apart, the cries of soldiers trapped under twisted metal, the chaos of shouting voices over the radio. And her, crawling on her stomach through broken glass, her hands pressed against wounds that wouldn't close. She should have left when the order came. If she had, maybe she wouldn't have carried these scars. Maybe her body wouldn't ache with every step. Maybe sleep wouldn't feel like punishment. But if she had left, more would have died. That was the loop her mind never stopped running. The choice between obedience and survival, between orders and conscience. She saved 2 men that night, but 3 others didn't make it out. And though no one blamed her, though command wrote it down as distinguished service under fire, she carried the weight like a stone in her chest. The limp the officer mocked earlier wasn't just shrapnel. It was memory hardened into flesh. The next morning she stood in line at the mess hall. Voices buzzed around her, casual, careless, the kind of talk soldiers share when nothing is expected of them. She listened without meaning to. New reassignment orders coming down today. Heard a few medics are being shipped out to the East Range for training drills. No man, it's bigger, something's brewing. Kept her face still, but inside the old tension coiled. She hadn't been told what her reassignment would be. The admiral's words lingered in her head. We owe you more than orders. What did that mean? After breakfast, she walked the perimeter fence. Not because she needed to, but because walking kept her restless thoughts at bay. Every step jarred her spine, sent a dull ache radiating into her ribs. She didn't flinch. Pain had been her companion for years now. A truck rolled past on the dirt road beyond the fence. The rattle of its engine carried her back to another truck, another road. The 19-year-old private gasping for air, blood seeping through her hands. She closed her eyes. For a moment she was there again. His voice cracked. Don't let me. She hummed the lullaby, soft, desperate. He slipped away before the final note. When she opened her eyes, the truck was gone. Just the wind now, just the fence. That evening she was summoned to the admiral's office. The summons wasn't formal. A runner brought a message. 4 words scrawled on a folded slip of paper. Report at 1900 hours. She arrived early. The admiral sat behind his desk, the same photograph still resting beside him. His gaze lifted when she entered. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then quietly, Lieutenant Raines, do you believe scars tell the whole story? She paused, chose silence. He nodded slightly. I didn't think so because I have scars too, not visible, but they've shaped me just the same. His hand brushed across the photograph. A woman in fatigues, a battlefield nurse, the same haunted strength carried now. He leaned forward. You've been reassigned, but this isn't standard duty. It's not paperwork, it's not drills. I need someone who knows what pain looks like, who understands silence. Her pulse ticked. What's the mission, sir? The admiral's eyes darkened. There's a unit downrange, isolated. Morale is fractured. Losses have cut them open. They don't need speeches. They don't need promises. They need someone to remind them how to keep breathing when it feels impossible. He let the weight of his words hang. Then, that someone is you. Her throat tightened. She didn't answer right away, because inside something twisted, pride, fear, the ghosts of memory. She wasn't sure she could do it again, but she also wasn't sure she could refuse. Finally she spoke, her voice low, steady. When do I leave? The admiral's eyes softened. At dawn. Saluted, slow and deliberate. For the first time in years, the gesture didn't feel forced. It felt necessary. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, boots on the floor, scars aching under the weight of the dark. She thought of the 19-year-old private, of the corporal she carried across the valley, of the men she couldn't save. And she wondered, not for the first time, if she was strong enough to keep going. But dawn didn't care. It came anyway. The sun lifted over the horizon, turning the base gold. And Raines, combat medic, Bronze Star, survivor of 3 deployments, rose with it. She tightened her pack, straightened her spine, and walked toward the waiting transport, each step heavy with memory but certain with resolve. She didn't know what waited for her. She only knew this. Silence had carried her this far, and silence would carry her again. Why did the air feel heavier the moment she stepped off the transport? It wasn't just the heat, it was the silence, the kind of silence that didn't come from peace, but from exhaustion. Adjusted her pack and looked around. The forward operating base was smaller than she expected. The wire fencing sagged in places. Sandbags stacked along the entry point were sun-bleached, patched with duct tape. Soldiers moved about, but their movements lacked energy. Their eyes were distant. Even the ones who noticed her barely reacted. She knew that look. She had seen it before in too many faces. It wasn't laziness. It was weariness, the kind that seeped into bone, the kind that didn't lift when the sun rose. A sergeant met her at the gate, mid-40s, square jaw, lines etched deep into his face. His name tag read Harlan. He gave a curt nod. Lieutenant Rains. Yes, Sergeant. Admiral said you'd be coming. I'll be straight with you. The men aren't thrilled about another body showing up, especially not one here to observe morale. They think it means Washington's breathing down their necks. Said nothing. Harlan studied her for a moment, then added, "Can you do what you came here to do, ma'am?" She met his gaze, steady, silent. Harlan gave a short huff of breath, not quite laughter, not quite respect. "All right then, this way." He led her through the camp. A handful of soldiers glanced up as she passed. Some looked curious, some skeptical. One, leaning against a Humvee, muttered something under his breath. She caught only fragments, limp waste of space. She kept walking. The medical tent was smaller than the one she'd worked in overseas. 2 cots, a shelf of supplies that looked half empty, a desk with a cracked surface. Harlan gestured toward it. "This'll be yours, don't expect luxury." She nodded, dropped her pack. The cot groaned under the weight. When Harlan left, she stood still for a long moment, listening outside, boots scuffed against gravel, voices low, clipped, somewhere beyond the fence. A distant rumble, maybe a convoy, maybe thunder. The air was thick with dust, with heat, with unspoken tension. She pulled out her notebook, the same one she'd written in at Base Grant. She opened to a blank page, stared at it, then closed it again. Not yet. That evening she joined the unit in the mess hall. Conversations hushed when she walked in. Eyes tracked her, slid away. She took a tray, filled it without comment, and sat at an empty table. Minutes passed. Soldiers came and went. No one joined her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't cruelty. It was distance. The kind people put up when they've lost too much. She chewed slowly, the food tasteless, the air heavy. She remembered her first deployment, how she had felt the same, like an outsider, an observer. Not part of the circle back then. She tried too hard to fit in, told jokes, forced laughter. None of it had worked, she learned eventually. Belonging wasn't claimed, it was earned. And earned through silence more than words. The next morning she reported to the motor pool. A group of soldiers clustered around a vehicle, arguing over repairs. One cursed, slammed a wrench onto the hood. Another shook his head. Stepped closer. "What's wrong?" The soldier nearest to her, young, buzz-cut, jaw tight, glanced at her limp, then away. "Doesn't matter." She looked at the engine, saw the cracked hose. "Coolant line," she said quietly. "If you wrap it with tape, it'll hold until you get a replacement." The young soldier frowned. "How the hell would you?" He stopped. His eyes shifted just for a second, as if remembering who she was. He didn't thank her, he just muttered, "Yeah, fine." She walked away. Later that afternoon, a medevac chopper came in. Dust whipped across the camp as the blades roared overhead. 2 soldiers carried in a wounded private, leg torn open, blood dark and steady. The medic on duty shouted orders, fumbling with bandages. Stepped in without hesitation. "Pressure here," she instructed. Her hands already moving, the medic obeyed without question. She worked quickly, calmly, the same rhythm she had drilled into herself years ago. Clamp, wrap, hold. The private screamed once, then went still. His eyes met hers, wide, terrified. She didn't flinch. She leaned close, whispered, "You're not alone, stay with me." The bleeding slowed, the bandage held. The private's chest rose, shaky but steady. When the helicopter lifted off again, the medic turned to her. Sweat streaked his face. "If you hadn't been here." She shook her head. "He's alive, that's all that matters." Word spread. That night in the mess hall, when she walked in, the silence wasn't as sharp. A few soldiers nodded. One even slid his tray closer, though he didn't speak progress. But not everyone was convinced. Later, in the dim glow of the barracks, she overheard two voices, low, bitter. "She's broken, limp like that. She won't last. Scars don't make you strong. They just mean you were dumb enough to get hit." Closed her eyes, let the words pass through her. She didn't confront them, she didn't argue. She just lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence afterward. But inside, she felt the old ache again, the question she never stopped asking. Was she really strong, or just stubborn? The next day brought patrol orders, routine sweep outside the wire. Harlan assigned her to ride along. The Humvee rattled across dirt roads, dust choking the air. The soldiers with her barely spoke. One stared out the window, jaw clenched. Another fiddled with his rifle, sat silent, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes scanning the horizon. Halfway through the route, the vehicle jolted to a stop. The driver cursed, smoke hissed from under the hood. Felt her chest tighten. The desert stretched empty in every direction, too quiet, too still. Then a sound, not loud, not obvious, just a faint click beneath the wheels. Her voice cut through the silence. "Everyone out now." The soldiers froze, confused. "Move," she snapped, louder this time. They scrambled out. Seconds later, the blast tore the Humvee apart, metal shrieked, fire erupted. The concussion threw dust high into the air. The soldiers stared at the wreckage, stunned. Stood steady, her ears rang, her ribs ached, but her eyes were clear. Harlan looked at her. "How the hell did you?" She didn't answer. Because sometimes, silence saves more lives than orders. Why did they look at her differently now? Not with pity, not with suspicion, something else, something harder to name. The morning after the blast, the camp felt altered. The Humvee's wreckage still smoldered beyond the wire, blackened metal twisted into useless shapes. Word had spread fast, how she'd called it, how she'd gotten them out seconds before the explosion. Soldiers nodded to her when she passed, subtle, quick, a recognition that hadn't been there before. But not all of them, some still looked away, eyes shadowed with doubt. Trust was never given fully in one moment. It came in pieces, earned slowly, chipped out of silence. Sergeant Harlan found her outside the medical tent, his boots crunching on gravel. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "They're talking about you," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Half think you've got some sixth sense, half think it was dumb luck." He crossed his arms. "I don't care which, you kept them alive, that's enough." Gave a small nod, nothing more. Harlan studied her a moment longer. "But I'll tell you this, they're watching. Every move you make from here on, it's being weighed." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. He turned and left, his words hanging in the air like dust. Later that day, she returned to her cot, sat on the edge, and opened her notebook. She tried again to write about that night, the mission that had carved her scars, but her hand shook. The pen hovered, then dropped. She pressed her palm against her ribs, feeling the cross-hatched lines beneath the fabric. Memory pressed back harder than ink ever could. She closed the notebook, silence again. That evening the soldiers gathered in the mess hall. The air was restless. Voices louder than usual, fueled by nerves and unspoken fear. The explosion had rattled everyone. Some masked it with laughter, others with anger. Sat alone, her tray untouched. She watched, listened. A young soldier at the next table slammed his cup down. "We're sitting ducks out here. Command doesn't care. We're just pieces on a board." Another shook his head. "We just need to hold out until rotation. 6 more weeks, that's it." The first one barked a bitter laugh. 6 weeks. You think we'll all still be here in 6 weeks? The words cut through the room. No one answered. Looked at him. His face was hard, but his hands trembled when he lifted his cup again. She could have spoken, could have told him what she had seen, what she had endured, that survival wasn't measured in weeks or rotations, but in moments, in every breath you refused to surrender. But she stayed silent. Because words would sound like speeches, and speeches meant nothing here. Instead, she stood, carried her tray to the return and left, not dramatic, not loud, just gone. That night sleep wouldn't come. The walls of the barracks pressed too close. Every creak, every whisper in the dark dragged her back into old memories. The firefight in Kandahar, the corporal bleeding out in her arms, the lullaby humming through a dust-filled truck. She sat up, boots on the floor, sweat clinging to her skin. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to block it all out. But silence wasn't enough this time. The ghosts were too loud. Her ribs ached, not from scars, from memory. She stood, walked out into the night air. The camp was quiet. The flag at the center post hung limp in the still air. She sat on a crate, her body bent forward, hands locked together. And for the first time in years, she whispered aloud, not to anyone, not to the night, just to herself. "I stayed too long." The words broke something inside her. The memory of that mission surged up again, the order to retreat, the choice she didn't obey. She saved 2, lost 3. The math never balanced, it never would. Her throat tightened, her chest heaved once, twice, then silence swallowed her again. She thought of the 19-year-old private, his eyes, his voice, "Don't let me." She had promised herself she wouldn't cry, not in front of anyone, not even alone. But that night, under the weight of the stars, a single tear slipped down her cheek. She let it. The next morning she rose before dawn. The camp was still asleep. She walked the perimeter, the dust cold under her boots. The sky lightened slowly, colors bleeding into the horizon. A voice came behind her. "You don't sleep much, do you?" It was Harlan. His eyes carried the same exhaustion she felt. He lit a cigarette, offered her one. She shook her head. "You're not the only one haunted," he said after a long drag. "These men, they've lost more than they can admit. They need someone who won't crack, someone who reminds them you can carry scars and still walk forward." Looked at him. She wanted to say she did crack. Every night that silence wasn't strength. It was survival, but she didn't. Harlan flicked ash into the dirt. "Don't underestimate what your quiet means, Lieutenant. Sometimes silence is the only language soldiers trust." He walked away, leaving her in the rising light. For the first time since arriving, she felt something shift inside. Not peace, not relief, but a small thread of resolve. Later that day, she found the same young soldier who had shouted in the mess hall. He was cleaning his rifle, movements sharp, too fast, too rough. She approached, crouched down beside him. He glanced up, defensive. "What, here to lecture me?" She shook her head. "No lectures." He frowned. "Then why are you here?" She didn't answer right away. She just sat there, her presence steady, her silence patient. Finally she spoke, one sentence. "You're not alone." His jaw clenched, his eyes flickered. He looked away. But his hand slowed. The rifle piece slipped less violently into place. She stood, left without another word. Sometimes that was enough. That night when she lay down on her cot, the ceiling above her didn't feel as heavy. The ghosts were still there, they always would be. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a faint echo of something else. Not hope, not yet. But the possibility of it. Why did the desert feel louder than the base? The hum of engines, the crunch of tires on gravel, the nervous rhythm of rifles tapping against armor. They were on patrol again, further out this time, skirting a valley that had seen too much fighting in too few years. The air shimmered with heat. The sky was vast and merciless. Sat in the back of the lead vehicle, her pack wedged against her legs. Across from her, 2 soldiers shifted uneasily, eyes darting to the windows as if the rocks themselves might come alive. No one spoke. Not much needed to be said out here. Silence wasn't awkward, it was survival. Half an hour in, the convoy slowed, dust swirled. A checkpoint, little more than a makeshift barrier of sandbags and rusted metal drums, came into view. 2 soldiers on guard waved them forward. His eyes narrowed. Something was off. The guards' uniforms didn't match. Their rifles looked too clean, too staged. Her chest tightened. She leaned forward, tapped Harlan on the shoulder. "Stop." He frowned. "What?" "Stop the convoy now." He didn't argue. One look at her eyes, and he barked the order. The vehicle screeched to a halt. And then it came, the crack of gunfire. The fake checkpoint erupted, rifles spitting fire. Bullets slammed into metal, glass, sand. The world exploded into chaos. Dropped low, heart pounding, the soldiers shouted, returning fire, scrambling for cover. Dust filled her lungs. A scream cut through the noise. She turned. One of the privates had gone down, blood pooling from his thigh. Instinct took over. She crawled across the floor, dragging her pack with her. Bullets whined overhead. Shards of glass rained down. She pressed her hands to the wound, felt the hot rush of blood against her skin. "Stay with me," she said, voice calm, steady, even as her pulse hammered in her ears. "You're not alone." The private's eyes widened, frantic. She tightened the tourniquet, forced her breath to slow. "Look at me, just me." Around them, the firefight raged. Harlan shouted orders, rifles cracked. Explosions thudded in the distance, but stayed locked on the wounded soldier, her silence stronger than the chaos. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the gunfire faltered, then ceased. Dust hung heavy in the air. The ambush had broken. The checkpoint was silent now, bodies strewn across sandbags and dirt. Harlan's voice rang out, "All clear. Secure the perimeter." Exhaled, her arms trembling. The private was pale but alive. The bleeding slowed. She eased back, her ribs aching with every breath. The others gathered, sweat streaking their faces, eyes darting between the destroyed checkpoint and the medic crouched in the dirt. No one spoke, but something had shifted. They had seen her under fire, not panicked, not broken, just steady. Harlan crouched beside her, voice low, "You just saved him." She shook her head. "He saved himself, I just held the line." Harlan's eyes softened. He didn't argue. Back at camp, the aftermath weighed heavy. The wounded private was flown out, stable but fragile. The others sat in silence, their faces drawn, their movements slow. Moved through the tent quietly, checking supplies, cleaning instruments, organizing bandages. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but the men watched her differently now. Respect, that was the word for it. Not loud, not declared, but present. That night, sitting on her cot, she felt the ache return, not just in her ribs but in her chest. She had done what she always did, held others together, but who held her? She thought of the 19-year-old private again, his final breath, his eyes begging for something she couldn't give. And now this one, alive, but fragile. How many more would she carry in silence before her body and soul gave out? Her notebook lay open on her lap. She wrote a single line. "Strength isn't silence. Strength is carrying silence until it breaks you, and still choosing to carry it again." The words blurred through her tired eyes. She closed the notebook, lay back, stared at the ceiling. Sleep came fitful, jagged, dreams of fire, of smoke, of voices she couldn't answer. At dawn, she woke to the sound of boots outside, soldiers gathering, murmurs carried through the tent. She stepped out, squinting against the rising sun. A group of soldiers stood near the flagpole, their faces solemn. The private she had saved the day before had been evacuated overnight. They didn't know if he would make it. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Stepped forward, the men parted, eyes turning to her. She didn't make a speech, didn't offer false comfort. She simply raised her hand, touched her chest, then lowered it, a silent salute. One by one, they followed, hands to hearts, no words, just silence. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, not victory, not hope, but understanding. That night when she sat alone again, she felt the ghosts stirring, the 19-year-old, the corporal, the three she couldn't save. Their voices echoed. But alongside them now, something new. The silence of the living, the weight of trust. And she wondered, not for the first time, if silence itself could be a kind of redemption. Why did her hands shake when no one was watching? Not in the field, not when the bullets flew, but afterward alone, in the silence she had built her life around. The mission at the checkpoint had changed everything around camp. Soldiers nodded to her now, some even approached her, not with words of thanks. Soldiers rarely did that, but with questions, quiet ones about pain, about fear, about whether the ghosts ever went away. She never lied, but she never gave the whole truth either. "They don't go away," she said once, sitting on a crate beside a private who couldn't sleep, "but you learn to walk with them." The private nodded, staring at the dirt. "Does it get easier?" She paused, then answered softly, "Not easier, just different." That was enough for him, but not for her. Because when she was alone, the ghosts didn't just walk beside her. They pressed against her chest, crushing, relentless. Her notebook filled with fragments, sentences cut short, memories jagged and raw. She never read them back. She just wrote and closed the pages, as if sealing them could keep the memories contained. But at night her body betrayed her, the nightmares came harder. She woke breathless, ribs aching, sweat soaking her shirt. Sometimes she sat up so fast she tore at the scars on her side, nails digging until the old wounds throbbed. And always, always the same face returned, the 19-year-old private in the back of the truck, his eyes asking a question she could never answer: why me? During the day, she hid it well. Her silence looked like strength to the others. They didn't see the way her hands trembled when she laced her boots. They didn't hear her whisper to herself before dawn, words she barely believed anymore. One more day, just one more. Harlan noticed, though he didn't say it outright, but his eyes lingered too long when she passed. One evening, he found her sitting alone near the wire, staring into the horizon where the desert met the fatting sky. "You're carrying too much," he said. She didn't look at him. "So are you." He exhaled smoke, the end of his cigarette glowing in the dusk. "Difference is, I let some of it out, you don't." She finally turned, met his gaze. "If I let it out, I won't stop." The words hung between them. He didn't press. He just nodded, flicked ash into the sand, and walked away. That night the camp was restless. Rumors of another ambush spread, voices tense, laughter forced. Soldiers drifted into the mess hall in small groups, followed, listening. One corporal leaned forward, whispering harshly, "We're down 3 men this month already, and command still sends us on these useless patrols. We're nothing but bait." Someone muttered agreement. Another slammed his fist on the table. Sat in the corner, her tray untouched. The tension was sharp, dangerous. Desperation turned to anger faster than bullets flew. She could have spoken. She could have reminded them of what they'd survived. She could have told them silence was strength. But she couldn't, not tonight. Her throat felt tight, her chest hollow. She stood and left, her boots echoing against the gravel. Inside the barracks, she sat on her cot and pulled off her shirt. The scars along her ribs caught the dim light, ridges and shadows across pale skin. She pressed her fingers against them, hard, as if pressure could erase memory. But memory pressed back. She thought of the corporal she carried across the valley, his blood soaking into her uniform until she couldn't tell where his wounds ended and hers began. She thought of the 3 she didn't save, the lullaby that failed to keep a boy alive. Her chest shook, her breath came ragged. She bent forward, head in her hands. And for a terrifying moment, she felt it, the edge of collapse, the weight of silence too heavy to bear, the urge to scream, to break, to let everything pour out in one uncontrollable flood. But she didn't, she couldn't. Because outside they believed in her, and belief was fragile. So she swallowed it back, pressed her palms into her eyes until stars burst in the dark, whispered again, "One more day." The next morning she moved like nothing had happened, checked supplies, walked the perimeter, nodded at soldiers who nodded back. But Harlan's eyes caught hers across the motor pool, and she knew he saw it, the cracks spidering through her silence. Later he approached her again. "You don't have to carry it all alone, Rains." She tightened her jaw. "I do." "Why?" Because if I don't, someone else will have to, and they've already got enough. Harlan studied her, his face softened just slightly. Maybe, but don't mistake silence for strength. Sometimes it's just silence. She didn't answer, she couldn't. That night she lay awake again, the barracks quiet, the air heavy. She thought about what he'd said, about silence, about strength, about the line between the two. And for the first time she wondered, had she crossed it? Was she still strong? Or was she just quiet because she didn't know what else to be? The question haunted her long into the night. When sleep finally came, it came hard. Dreams of fire, dreams of blood, dreams of a voice whispering, "Don't let me." She woke with a gasp, ribs aching, hands trembling. She pressed her face into the pillow, muffling the sound. And still, when dawn came, she rose, straightened her uniform, tightened her boots, stepped into the sun. Because that was what she knew, that was all she knew. Why did the air feel wrong before the first shot was fired? Because sometimes a body remembers danger before the mind does. The convoy moved slow along the valley road. Jagged cliffs rose on either side, shadows cutting across the dirt. Sat in the second vehicle, her pack at her feet, her hands steady in her lap. But inside she felt it, the same unease that had prickled her skin at the false checkpoint. The silence was too deep. No wind, no birds, just the grind of tires and the thump of her own pulse. Then came the sound, a crack, not thunder, not rockfall, a rifle. The lead vehicle jerked, glass shattered, voices shouted, gunfire erupted from the ridges above. Ambush! Chaos swallowed the valley. Soldiers scrambled from vehicles, diving for cover. Bullets raked the dirt, sparks flying as rounds struck metal. Dust thickened, choking every breath. Hit the ground, rolled behind the wheel well. Her heart hammered. Her ribs burned with every inhale, but her hands were steady. She pulled her kit open, scanning the battlefield. A cry tore through the noise. A soldier down 50 feet away, blood seeping into the sand. Moved low, fast, her boots digging into the dirt. Bullets screamed overhead. The world narrowed to that one body, that one wound. She reached him, pressed her hands hard against his chest. Blood bubbled through her fingers, his eyes wide, terrified. "Am I?" "Stay with me," she cut in, voice calm, firm. "You're not alone." She worked fast, bandages wrapping, pressure steady, her body shielding him from stray rounds around them. Gunfire roared, explosions shook the earth. But her silence anchored him, anchored herself. A shadow loomed Harlan. He dropped beside her, firing up the ridge, covering her as she tied off the dressing. "We can't hold this position," he shouted. She nodded once, but her focus never broke. Clamp, wrap, breathe. Another explosion, closer this time. The ground shook, dirt spraying across her face. For a second she froze. Her mind pulled her backward. To the night she hadn't retreated, to the three she lost, to the ghosts that never left. Her chest clenched, her breath faltered, the world blurred. "Not here, not now." The soldier beneath her groaned, blood still pumping. His voice cracked. "Don't let me." The words hit her like a knife. The same words the 19-year-old private, years ago, dying in her arms. Her hands trembled, just for a moment. And that was when Harlan grabbed her shoulder, shook her hard, his voice cut through the chaos. "Rains, focus. He needs you now." Her eyes snapped back. The valley returned. The soldier beneath her gasped, clinging to life. Her silence broke, but not into words, into action. Her hands steadied, her breath slowed. She pressed harder, sealing the wound, ignoring the burn of her ribs, the ringing in her ears. The firefight raged. Minutes dragged like hours. Finally, reinforcements arrived, a flanking squad pushing the attackers back. The gunfire tapered. Shouts replaced it. Then silence. Smoke hung thick. Bodies scattered across the ridges. The valley reeked of blood and gunpowder. Knelt over the wounded soldier, his chest bandaged, his breathing shallow but steady, alive. Her arms shook as she eased back. The ache in her ribs screamed now. Her vision swam. Harlan crouched beside her, panting. You held him." She shook her head faintly. "He held on, I just didn't let go." The chopper thundered overhead minutes later. The wounded were lifted out. The survivors slumped against rocks, their faces hollow, their silence heavy. Sat apart, her hands stained dark, her body trembling now that it was over. She pressed her palms against her thighs, trying to stop the shaking. Inside, the ghosts clawed at her. The 19-year-old private, the corporal, the three she hadn't saved, and now this soldier, hovering between life and death. Her chest constricted, her throat tightened. Harlan approached, crouched low, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You almost broke out there." She didn't look at him. "I did break." He shook his head. "No, you bent, you shook, but you didn't break, you stayed, that's the difference." Her eyes burned, she turned away, jaw tight. "What if one day I do?" "Then you won't be alone," he said simply. The words struck deeper than she wanted them to. She had built her silence like armor, carried it like duty, but armor cracks, duty weighs. And for the first time she realized, maybe she didn't have to carry it forever alone. Back at camp, the men looked at her differently again, not just with respect, with something sharper, trust. They had seen her falter, but they had also seen her rise again. That night the barracks were quiet. Most were asleep, drained, sat on her cot, her notebook open. She wrote slowly, carefully, words she hadn't dared before. "I am afraid, I am tired, but I will not let go." She closed the notebook, exhaled. And for the first time in years, she felt something almost like release. Not peace, not forgiveness, but the smallest crack of light inside the silence. Tomorrow would bring more ghosts, more wounds, more weight, she knew that. But tonight, she let herself believe one thing. That silence wasn't the absence of strength, it was the proof of it. Why did the camp feel different when she walked through it now? Not safer, not lighter, but steadier. The ambush in the valley had left its mark. 3 wounded, 1 critically, but no deaths, not this time. And in a place where loss was measured almost weekly, survival was rare enough to feel like victory. The soldiers carried themselves differently afterward. Their shoulders weren't looser. The weight was still there, but their eyes lingered on when she passed. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. She felt it, trust, stitched together from fire and blood. Harlan found her near the perimeter one evening. The desert wind carried dust across the fence line, painting the horizon in soft gold. He lit another cigarette, the flame flickering in the dusk. "You've done more here in a few weeks than I've managed in months," he said. She shook her head. "I didn't do anything." He gave her a long look. "Tell that to the men who are still breathing because of you." She didn't answer, she rarely did, but his words stuck, trailing her long into the night. Back in her quarters, she opened her notebook. For once, her hand didn't shake, she wrote slowly. Sometimes silence carries, sometimes silence heals, and sometimes silence reminds others that they are not alone in theirs. She stared at the words. They looked strange on paper, too honest, too raw. She closed the notebook, pressed her hand against it. For a moment, she let herself breathe without ghosts pressing too close. The days passed. The unit patrolled, repaired, endured, moved among them quietly. A medic, a presence, a reminder. She never tried to lead. She never tried to inspire. She simply stayed, and in staying, she became something more than orders or speeches ever could. One night, the youngest soldier in the unit, the same one who had once mocked her limp, stopped her outside the mess tent. His eyes didn't hold arrogance anymore, just something almost shy. "I was wrong," he said, his voice cracked. "About you, about all of it." Studied him, his hand shook slightly as he spoke. Fear, not shame, she knew the difference. "You'll learn," she said softly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a lecture, just truth, and for him it was enough. Later, when she lay on her cot, she thought of the 19-year-old private again. For years, his face had haunted her, eyes wide, voice breaking, words unfinished. But tonight, when the memory came, something was different. The image was still sharp. The grief still cut deep, but for the first time she whispered back to him, "I didn't let you go, I never will." Her chest ached, her throat burned, but when the tears came this time they weren't just for loss. They were for memory, for carrying, for honoring. The next morning the admiral arrived at the camp. His visit was unexpected. The men snapped to attention, boots sharp against the dirt, stood among them, her uniform pressed, her scars hidden beneath fabric. The admiral's eyes found hers for a moment. Nothing passed between them, just silence. And in that silence, she felt something settle, recognition, respect. He spoke to the unit briefly, words about duty, resilience, sacrifice. They listened. But their eyes drifted back to when he finished. Because they knew speeches didn't save them. Silence did, her silence. When the admiral departed, Harlan stepped beside her. "They'll remember you long after they forget me," he said. She shook her head. "No, they'll remember each other, that's enough." The weeks bled into each other. Eventually, orders came down, was to rotate out, reassigned once again. On her final morning, she stood at the edge of camp, her pack slung over her shoulder. The sun rose slow, burning the horizon. The men gathered not in formation, not in regulation, but in silence. One by one, they touched their hands to their chests. A salute outside the book, a gesture they'd taken from her without ever being told. She returned at once. No words, no speeches, just silence. The transport waited. She climbed aboard. Her limp steady, her eyes forward. The engine roared, dust clouding behind. She didn't look back, not because she didn't care, but because she knew the truth. Some legacies don't need to be witnessed to last. That evening, far from the camp, she sat alone again. A bench near a flagpole, the sun fading into night. Her hand brushed across her ribs, not in shame, in memory, in honor. For the brothers and sisters who never came back. For the 19-year-old who still hummed in her dreams. For the ones she carried in silence. And for the ones who had carried her without ever knowing it. She closed her eyes, breathed, let the silence stretch. And in that silence, she understood something she had never let herself admit before. Strength wasn't about never breaking. It wasn't about hiding pain. It was about carrying it quietly, steadily, and still standing when the day demanded you rise again. The ghosts would never leave. The scars would never fade, but neither would the dignity of what she had endured. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.